G'day humans, welcome to the safe space for dangerous ideas. And here's a dangerous idea for you. The idea is that there are a small handful of things that governments could do which would dramatically improve the lives of their citizens, which on both sides of politics they decline to do because political parties, along with corporations and media moguls, conspire to keep things rotten because it's in their interest. If all that sounds a little bit conspiratorial, a little bit doji, a little bit Elon-y, a little bit QAnon, rest assured there is a handsome and thoughtful young gentleman who has been producing viral videos about precisely this subject for years, with millions of views on YouTube and Instagram. He goes by the moniker Punter's Politics and reveals to Australians specifically the revolving door between their elected officials and lobbying positions and cushy jobs in the industries that they are supposed to regulate, the negligence of governments in collecting adequate revenue from the vast mining and natural resources and gas profits that this country spins off, and the kind of cosy alliance between big media, big corporations and big politics that immiserates regular people and could easily be reformed if only we had the will and the know-how to do so. Australia is going to face a national federal election in the next few months, and I thought we would kick off the beginning of our election programming with a fun, whimsical, freewheeling chat with the one, the only, the ever-charming Punter's Politics. I think you're right, because here, step one, Kamala Harris doesn't go on Joe Rogan. Step two, Kamala Harris loses election.
It's Matt.
And here in Australia, step one, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese doesn't go on your podcast.
I mean, I don't want to jinx anything.
Question mark.
Don't risk it, I say. I'm on the pod.
Why would you risk it?
Why would you risk it?
Why would you?
And my pitch is, you want to talk to regular punters. The unique and cool thing about Australian politics is that we have this thing of like, you're not better than me.
Yeah.
Even if you're the bloody leader of the country,
yeah,
you're not better than me.
Yeah.
For Australia, if you want to be Prime Minister, you have to be a man of the punters. You have to.
Yeah, yeah.
And I can offer him that.
That's
I can
literally
say
the name of your show. Also, you're a big bloody lefty, so you're going to go soft on him.
That's what they say.
Yeah.
Actually, probably because Albo is the Prime Minister, I critique him more than anyone else.
Right.
Because he's in power right now.
Yeah. Also, I do find that then I'm guilty of this myself because I also think of myself as broadly someone on the left. There is an instinct to be more critical of one's own side because you don't want them to let you down. Like, I mean, it's the narcissism of small differences in a way. It's like you can be critical of your own more.
Yes, as you should be.
Yeah.
I think, but what I'm trying to do, maybe naively and in a silly way, I'm trying to break the current political labels and dichotomies that are set up for us. So the left and the right is just a nice story to be told so we battle over the cultural differences. When we all actually agree on the bigger structural stuff, you can talk to anyone, conservative or not, and say, hey, should our politicians, should they get jobs in the sector they just regulated? Should the Northern Territory backbencher or minister for whatever, Nicole Madison is the one I'm thinking of, fact checks welcome, was in the government writing rules for INPEX. Then she went to work for INPEX. Are we cool with that? And I'm trying to go, and so what people do is then they go to dismiss any criticism that may or may not be valid of their side or not. They'll then revert to these labels left, right. And that's kind of the political sphere we have. I'm wondering if we can do it differently. I'm wondering, because I believe it's far more establishment, anti-establishment. Established power centers, anti-established power centers. How do we break it apart?
That's interesting. But don't you think that there are establishment people who are now using the anti-establishment wave or badge to gain power, like Elon and Trump and people like that, who come in as if they're not powerful and then just accrete more power to themselves?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Anything can be used. And I think that's my other thing I'm attempting to always try and point to is just go, if we vote for policies, not parties, in Australia, we're more party-oriented, which is good. We don't have cult of personality because our politicians don't have personality.
Exactly.
Because everyone's saying, oh, no, Peter Dutton's going to be Trump. I'm like, Trump? That bloke's got charisma. He is like, there's something likable about him.
Yeah.
Dutton, good luck.
Yeah.
He just doesn't have it. And I like that. But I'm trying to go, just look at policy, look at how they vote. Don't get caught up in it. And maybe it's too simplified, but I feel like you're less likely to get fooled if you know what policy you want. And at that election, at that time, this one time, you vote for that because parties change. The Labor Party of Shorten that lost the previous election, it had half the policies of the Greens.
Yeah.
And the Greens are now standing there like, yeah, negative gearing and all this sort of stuff. And suddenly Albo's like, oh, you bloody communists. And I'm like, Bill Shorten wanted that.
Yes.
And I think, I don't know, I've just got this picture of politics as like, change whatever team, whatever, know your outcomes and use the political apparatus to yank it your direction. And if you have to hop off the train, jump off, get off a team because they're not representing you, do it. Who cares?
What do you make of the evolution of the teams? So, like, there's the evolution that you just remarked upon, which is the evolution of the left, I suppose, from what might have been traditional bread and butter left-wing issues, like issues of economic justice, right? Issues of helping people financially and expanding the welfare state. And then there's this. That's a very sort of blue-collar, traditional union understanding of the left. But then there's this other part of the left, which is quite a university-educated, elite understanding of sort of social justice, where, identity issues and race and gender and LGBTQIA plus issues are at the fore. And there's this sort of uneasy alliance between the two. But at the same time, on the right, there's like your old-school kind of economically conservative, hawkish, like John Howard or like George H.W. Bush, like people. And then there's this new sort of reactionary, cultural, like Trumpy kind of populist right wing, which were not cut social services and would actually be kind of, in a weird way, more left-wing economically, but taps into anxiety that people might have that is also cultural about, I don't know, migration or transgender kids or whatever the cultural hot button thing might be. Can you where do I even stand in all this? It's like I don't know who's what anymore.
And I think that confusing landscape, especially since the US infiltrates into Australia and people are like watching the US and watching Australian, I'm like, all right, I listen to Planet America podcast,
Chaz's show.
Love his show, love what he does.
Our listeners, if you don't know what we're talking about here, is that Chaz Licciardello has been on this show just before the last US election to talk about politics. So they might remember Chaz from that. He has a television show. Great
show, great podcast, 3.5 hours. Yeah. He gives the facts and the context.
It's a 3.5 hour podcast?
Minimum.
What the fuck's he doing? What is he, Joe Rogan?
He's giving him a run for his money. Except Chaz does half of it solo, so good luck, Joe Rogan. He's just because he's consuming everything in the fire hose of US politics.
Amazing.
So I observe that as a hobby.
Okay.
But then for me, simplifying politics here, I go, well, I'm just going to do Australian stuff. I'm just going to try and understand what's going on here.
Yeah.
I don't know anything, really, about anything. I just listen to podcasts. I listen to you. I listen to a bunch of different people who are smarter than me. I collect them, and then I go, okay, there's a reason why people aren't reading this news article. It's boring and I don't understand. It's really like seeing a politician talk about what's broken in politics. They go, oh, it's outrageous that they went to work for this organization that they wrote the rule for. I'm like, no, but you're not outraged.
Yeah.
We need to just be honest with our feelings about this sort of stuff. And I think that's why people like when politicians like kind of get angry.
Yeah.
Because some of this stuff is to be outraged about.
Yeah.
And so I go, well, I'm just trying to simplify it to what I think the common problems are and the biggest problems. And I think to what you're saying about the new cultural left, I think that is just the perfect distraction for establishment power to pretend they are doing something. And I think this was much of the left in the US, much of the left now in Australia, which is the corporations can get on board with, like The Voice. Rio bloody Tinto backed The Voice.
The Voice was the referendum about whether or not Indigenous Australians should have a body established in the Constitution to advise Parliament about First Nations issues. Yeah, exactly. It's a way.
Good summary.
You just got to remember, I have a lot of American listeners, so you say The Voice, we're like, what the fuck's
that? Oh, that was pissed them off with the tipping thing at the beginning.
That's all right.
The tipping's great, America's awesome.
No, they know they're fucked on that respect. Good. It's also better to tell them that they're fucked because of tipping than to say that their whole country is fucked and headed for a civil war and it's irredeemably, Doomed. So that would also be bad. So
don't tell them that.
Don't tell them that.
We won't mention it.
Keep that one under the carpet.
Yeah.
So I know, exactly. There are all of these social justice versions of the left that don't require any actual sacrifice from people who hold economic power.
And that's why they do it.
And so it's easy for us to signal to each other that we're virtuous because we're on the right side of history.
And it happens all the time. Donald Trump just showed the right-wing virtue signal. It's now the Gulf of America. Who bloody cares? But...
Also, quick point about the Gulf of America, if I may.
Yep.
Isn't it actually more America-centric to call it the Gulf of Mexico? Because only an American, if you see the world through the point of view of an American, then you'd be like, down there, that's Mexico. Like you're looking out at Mexico and you're naming it from the perspective of the other thing that is next to it. But the Gulf of America implies that you're kind of positioned outside of America.
Looking at America.
Kind of looking at them. I don't know. I think in some ways...
I think America wants the attention, so I think they've done it the right way.
Yeah, because if there's anything America doesn't have enough of, it's the world's attention. This wilting flower of a nation.
Exactly.
That more of us...
Australians don't talk about it enough.
We need to pay more attention to Americans.
Yes.
This is the problem with the rest of the world.
We've established that, exactly.
Okay, so yes, social justice issues, economic justice. Were you finishing that thought or did that end?
So I think for me, they are the perfect bloody distraction. Rio Tinto, and I believe it was Rio Tinto, fact checks welcome, citations necessary, that blew up some 60,000-year-old indigenous cave somewhere for a mine.
By accident.
Yeah, they said sorry.
It's a mining company, if people don't know what Rio is. Or it was BHP or one of those, right?
Yes. One of the big ones.
Yep.
And anyway, and so during that conversation when I'm talking to people around me, just before I had Punter's Politics, I was like, I mean, once again, they're like, oh, it's going to be too far reaching. I'm like, whoa, would Rio Tinto and all these massive list of corporations, would they be backing this? If it literally did anything but a virtue signal, and apparently couldn't get a virtue signal over the line for whatever reason, but that's kind of my point. I'm trying to ignore that stuff, trying to pull people away from that stuff, because as much as it impacts a certain subset of people, which for them it's real and for them it's a struggle, for the average Aussie punter like me sitting in Newcastle, the thing that benefits sort of everybody are these big structural issues going corruption in politics. The fact that politicians are taking massive donations. They're afraid of Rupert Murdoch. They literally are controlled. Every issue we have comes back to corporate control of our government. And there's endless examples that I keep coming across that shock me every single time where I'm like, really? Martin Ferguson? I believe that's, I want to get his name right. If I'm going to name check a politician, let's just be more vague. I think it's Martin
A
Ferguson.
man whose name rhymes with Blarton Blurbison.
Yes. And fact check it, ex-resource minister for the Labor Party back in the Rudd-Gillard-Rudd era, wrote the PRRT or was instrumental in making it or had a hand in it, whatever, then went to work for British Gas. He is now currently the head of or high up top exec of the Energy Producers Australia, which is a fancy organisation that helps gas cartels not pay tax in Australia. 4 of the 5 members don't pay tax. They get our gas for free, blah, 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 blah. Like, for me, I'm like, this is what Australian politics should centre on.
So why is that corrupt? So, like,
not corrupt. It's all allowed. It's totally legal. Don't sue me.
Yeah, right.
It's allowed.
No. I'm not trying to catch you in a legal game.
Yeah. Why do punters think it's corrupt?
Why do you think it's corrupt?
I think it's corrupt. It's my opinion.
So, like, let's imagine that someone comes out of the oil and gas industry and then gets appointed to be the Minister for Resources. Yeah. I can understand why that would look corrupt because obviously they still have, I mean, they may be doing the bidding of their former colleagues.
Yeah.
But when you flip it the other way around and you say a politician should never be allowed to become a lobbyist for the industry that they were previously representing, what's the concern exactly?
Well, the concern is these sweet high-paying gigs that they get and the apparent coincidence that the people who used to be the politicians, and there's a conversation article some professor wrote about it, showing the number of positions that move between, and it's not just politicians, it's staffers, it's people that work in Parliament cycling through it. So it's a series of coincidences that somehow have led, so we can say, is it corrupt, is it not? And politicians and academics, they want to have this like really robust debate around, technically, is it allowed, is it not? Like in a court of law, I'd be sued, I'd be screwed because it's legal and they're like, well, you can't prove that.
I don't think they would say that it's just a coincidence that we happen to get jobs in the same sector. Wouldn't their argument be, to steelman it, you need people who understand how policy is made in these companies.
Yes.
We obviously have expertise. We've worked at the coalface, both in the public sector and the private. Who better than us?
I don't know, a professor who studied this stuff, someone else who hasn't worked for them. We're in a big world, Josh. And the thing is, they're highly paid as well. So, you get all right money as a politician. So, is it too much to sacrifice an even more highly paid gig? So the question...
But I guess I'm asking, what's the downside for the country in having someone who used to be in government working in a mining
conspiracy
company?
Or coincidence? And you can answer this, punters can answer this. But I've described the scenario where this is happening in lots of sectors across, and let's just focus on oil and gas in Australia and our resources. Coincidentally, these politicians move from government into private sector and back out. Coincidentally, Qatar, we exported more gas than Qatar. They made 70 billion. We made 2. Norway, 133 billion because they have a state-owned tax at 78%. Why doesn't Australia... Why? And INPEX, that's the thing I've got in the fore of my mind. I can tell you about why later. But INPEX, Japanese-owned mining gas company, part owned by the Japanese government, I believe. Fact checks welcome. They get our gas for free. In the last 10 years, they've gotten $40 billion in income, paid 0 in royalties. They literally get the input for their business for free. This is not smart business. This is not innovating. This is not anything.
Wait, they get it we give it to them?
Well, they have the gas. They sold it, made $40 billion. And this is where it gets complicated. The PRRT is a royalty resource rent. The way it's set up, they'll pay us later for it with some other... There's boring explanations as to why we don't have any. But for the everyday punter like me, I'm not an academic. I'm not a university professor. I'm just looking at 10 years of impacts operating in this country or more, couldn't tell you exactly, with record numbers of income and profits. Didn't pay anything for the gas.
Right, but one mechanism by which a country can make stupid decisions like not taxing its mining companies or gas companies is to look at what happened when a previous government did try under Kevin Rudd and Julia Gillard, where anytime a government tries to they tried to introduce a super resources tax, I think they called it, so like a super mining profits tax, where once mining companies earned over a certain amount, they'd get taxed. And, of course, it was, millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars went into a national scare campaign funded by the mining industry to tell everybody that everything was going to get expensive. They hit the airwaves saying, we're going to have to leave. We're not going to be mining in Australia anymore. We'll move to Brazil or Indonesia.
Yeah. Some other country, stable democracy that has heaps of resources in the ground. We'll just go there.
Exactly. If people aren't aware, Australia is an absolute mining behemoth. It has, I think it's number 2 on uranium, number 3 in the world on bauxite.
You look at the list.
Produces, Australia and Canada are totally dominate on a per capita or GDP basis for how big our mining industries are. The idea that they would pull out and go to
especially
Indonesia,
if they get it for free,
is crazy. Well, even if they didn't get it for free, right? But isn't that a more parsimonious explanation of why? So basically, the government fell.
Yeah.
The long story short is that the government basically collapsed, and the
opposition
tried and
party,
gave up. It was a total national scandal, and then the Conservatives got in, and then it was just never heard of again.
Yeah, that
dynamic can happen regardless of whether or not politicians are going into lobbying positions.
Yeah, it's all those things. It's everything. It's that, the fact that corporations dominate our media, the fact that Rupert Murdoch sets the conversation agenda in our country, every time, every issue people talk about, generally that hits the establishment media, Murdoch's kind of nudged it, and so that kind of sets the conversation because he owns so much of the media apparatus, and the Labor Party are just afraid of him. Of course they're afraid of him. They didn't pass gambling legislation. Labor wrote themselves. They wrote the policy themselves. With a former minister, and then everyone's on board with it except the Libs. But
this was a gambling policy
to ban gambling advertising, across the board.
Right.
Aussie punters, we're all cool with it. We're not making gambling illegal. Just stop it in sport when my kid's watching. Because I used to be a teacher. Yeah. I'm at school while State of Origin's on, and this guy's like, put $50 on New South Wales. And I was like, cool. He's like, you know the odds? I'm like, oh, no. He's like, well, it is. I'm like, okay. And this kid's like 13, 14. So I'm like, that can't be great, for their education.
And Australia is awash in gambling. Australia has
one of the highest rates
of gambling.
Lose the most in the world or something. So anyway, we've got a massive problem. It's clear there. It's non-controversial. You're not going to lose votes like in the mining thing, whatever. Once again, conspiracy or coincidence. Murdoch makes a lot of money from gambling ads, right? Gambling industry and sporting industry do as well. So there's some other vested interests. All of a sudden, Albo's like, oh, no, we can't. Oh, it's on legacy media. We don't know. We don't pass it. Well, we'll put some other things. And all the experts say if you change it to have like in this scenario or not, and you make it more specific, they slip through the cracks. Right, the more complicated you make, the more loopholes there are. They essentially kind of did that. And I just go, once again, Aussie punter, well, geez, you were for this. You said you'd do it. You're not. You're clearly afraid of this powerful individual named Rupert Murdoch. And it makes sense because of the example you gave with the mining industry.
Don't you find that reductive though? The idea that it's just because he's afraid of Rupert Murdoch. I mean, I think there are
but this is what I do. This is my job.
There are lots of reasons. Like there was also this example recently of Tanya Plibersek, who's the environment minister, I think, had this big new policy that she'd been hammering out with the Greens Party for years about a compromise on like a national environmental policy. And then the Prime Minister just shot it in the head, took it out behind the shed and shot it in the head.
And the WA Premier was apparently saying, that was me.
Yeah.
That's the reporting. I don't know.
So the West Australian Premier, who's from the same party as the federal government. And so then you look at that and you go, okay, well, is that Murdoch? Is that mining companies?
Wouldn't it just be the same vested interest?
Yeah. So isn't it a line? So
there's just so many.
You look at things from a conspiratorial point of view, and I look at things from like a structural or cultural point of view. And I think what's happening is that there's what you might call an old boys club, but it's not just boys anymore.
Yeah.
Of like subtle networks of people who listen to each other.
Yeah.
And I think that's sort of what you're pointing to with the revolving door between industry and government, that it's not exactly a problem per se that I think by definition that a person in government shouldn't be able to ever work in the industry that they're regulating. It's just that in practice, they still know people who are in Parliament House. They still have a beer with the person who knows someone who is still, in some regulatory capacity. They know people at Murdoch's, newspapers who also know people in mining companies. And there's this gigantic kind of subtle circle jerk that we all feel a bit left out of.
Which we punters would call corruption. The everyday Aussie would call corruption. Right. You're correct. All guys that have the time to sit down and analyze the power structures and how it happens, because it's never overt. It's never like, hey, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. But when I just connect the dots from the outside in, looking at this political system, what can happen in the political conversation is a little bit like, you're correct. When you sit down and you spell it out and you go, well, there's this factor, this factor, this factor, this factor, that all culminate in the fact that we're getting scammed. We're the biggest losers in the whole world. We're giving our resources away for free. We could be richer than Norway. That's like the end result of all of what you're talking about. But my whole job right now is to take people that are like really disengaged, it's not working for them, and try and hand them some pattern to pay attention to that I think is worth paying attention to. And even though what I then do is make things technically incorrect by saying coincidence or conspiracy, you tell me, the things I'm pointing at, I would argue, is kind of still a problem, even though you're like, oh, well, there's this network of people. Like somehow Kerry Stokes owns the media in WA, and somehow when WA put in the gas reservation policy, somehow the mine that Kerry Stokes was invested in got an exemption. Weird.
Yeah.
Super. And I can keep naming these examples.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm trying to say, I don't want people to be conspiratorial. And I want people to, I want to be specific about my critiques and things like that. So you pulling me up on leaps too far. But I also want to involve people in a conversation where they only have time for the flyover. They only have time to go, well, here's what we should be paying attention to. And what I would say is just look at how your politician votes. Are they doing what they are saying? And can we get some reform to the point where all the stuff you're talking about, we can slowly create a system and structures and rules that all Aussie punters would agree on that minimize the gamer mates that's going on. And we can start with the obvious stuff. With even if this minister had no idea that they wrote favorable rules and then got a job at Inpex and wasn't like looking out the door, winking, going, well, I can go work in this sector because I have experience in it. These are the stories we tell. The everyday Aussie would go, yeah, but probably shouldn't, hey, even if that didn't happen deliberately and there is no quid pro quo, you represent us, you should work for us, and there shouldn't even be the appearance of conflict of interest.
So no one who works in government should be able to go and work in the same sector that they were regulating, and vice versa. Presumably no one should be able to become a minister or work in a minister's office if they worked in that industry. That would be reform number one.
Something, I don't say once
like
again,
that.
this is where it gets to the level of like, I'd listen to smarter people debate how it
Well,
goes
this is
into
why
practice.
I, a smarter person,
Exactly, that's
and
what I
now
mean.
suggesting it.
Yes, excellent.
But I would also say number two would be politicians can't take gifts from industries that they regulate. I would have thought that is obvious.
Yeah, but they kind of don't, right?
They do.
Well,
Every minister...
I mean, Peter Dutton did fly on Jinnah Hart's jet somewhere. Like, we're cool with that,
But
right?
also, like, I mean, I was just trying to explain to an American friend of mine why Qantas is so shit and far behind technologically in comparison to other airlines. And I was like, this is what happens when a monopolistic company gives free upgrades and chairman's lounge access to all ministers so that they will back protectionist, anti-competitive policies that don't benefit the Australian flying public and keep pouring millions of dollars into a private company.
Yeah.
Like that is a reality. Like that is just a reality and a fact of the way that politicians profit from this one company and treat it as if it wasn't like a private profit-making company, but like some kind of national icon.
The most outrageous thing about that whole scenario is how cheap our politicians are. A chairman's lounge membership.
Yeah.
That's what stops Qatar Airways coming in here.
You know what's interesting? Joe Aston was on the show, who's the journo who wrote the book about Qantas.
Oh, yeah, I listened to that one.
Broke all those stories. And he makes a really interesting point in that book, which is politicians are the only people in society who live the lives of the rich and famous and aren't rich. A politician wakes up in the morning, a limousine comes and picks them up, it takes them to the Today Show where they're watched by millions of people listen to them, they're courted, they go to fancy lunches, and then they go home and they make, $180,000 a year or something. Right?
It's more than that now, but
bad,
but
like it's, it's well, it depends if you're PM or something. But
PM's like
the point is, it's not I'm flying to LA so I can drop $15,000 on a business class ticket money, right? Yeah. And that's really interesting. So there's this sweet spot at which the only time in their lives when they have to endure the ignominy of being a normal person is when they're going on a personal holiday. And it'd be sort of a bit weird to see a senior government cabinet minister sitting in seat 53K on the flight to LA.
Weird, but how good for their ego would it be?
And great for us as well.
Great for everybody.
Oh, I'd just eat a ton of beans before I got on and fart next to him the whole way, make life as miserable as possible.
But that's our life.
Welcome.
Welcome
to the hoi polloi. Welcome to being a punter.
Yes.
What's a punter to you?
Oh.
You use the word a lot.
I do. Well, it's part of the brand.
Yeah.
I don't know if you noticed, but it's on the T-shirt. Well,
it's a good T-shirt. I like the T-shirt.
For American friends of the show.
Yes.
And I think it works in America too.
Is it a word in America?
Yeah, it's like the kicker of like an NFL team.
Oh, of course, yeah.
Yeah. So they got the punter.
Yeah.
Which is often an Aussie, by the way. Comes from sometimes some AFL players go over to play some NFL.
Best punters in the world.
Well, they make way more money.
Right.
So yeah. So there's that punter.
Right.
And then obviously there's the Aussie one where they're gamblers. So a punter is someone having a punt.
Right.
Gambling. Yeah. Which is what we do a lot of. But it's now just become, everyday Aussie slang for just the punters in the pub. The people just having a crack.
But that's what I mean. Is that slang an Aussie? That's an Aussie term, right?
It could be.
Just like your entire brand is revolving around a word that you don't know.
The origins for. Do I need the Latin for it?
Yeah, no. But so to an American listener, a punter. What's the best way of describing it? It's It's a man in the street.
Just an
basically,
average
right?
Joe.
Average Joe.
Just, I'm average Joe politics.
Joe
That's
the
what I
plumber
am.
is a punter.
Yeah. And it's just, you know, in Australia we say, like, does it pass the pub test? Can you go to the pub and just sell it to the average everyday Aussie?
Say, does it pass the smell test or the bullshit test? Yeah.
And so that's kind of what I'm trying to do.
And what's interesting about what you focus on and why I think it's useful is that it is like a meta critique of the way that politics works, in the sense that you don't spend a lot of time on policy. You spend more time on, like, corruption. You know, why are we allowing this to happen? Why are we not insisting that things function better? And shouldn't we all be able to agree on this regardless of our political persuasion? We've just touched on sort of the revolving door, self-interest thing. I want to talk about the media, but I also want to talk about gas and natural resources, which we also touched on. You mentioned in passing Norway and some other country that taxes Qatar.
Yeah.
What do they do that we don't, and what should we be doing?
Yeah, this is where you get policy, and this is where I get fuzzy.
Right. Australia bad, Qatar great. Hang on, wait a second.
So in between those two sections, that's where I sit.
Yeah.
So as far as I understand it, Norway has a stake in its own oil company. Norse Oil is part owned by the Norwegian government. So one, it's got a stake in it. Direct dividends. So if the Norwegian government owns it, then Norwegian citizens have a stake and get the dividend from it. And this is where I'm going to get hazy. Someone smarter than me in the comments can work it out. But the tax rate for oil and gas is at 78%. Now, I don't know if that includes the dividend share of the owning part of the corporation.
But basically, they have like a futures fund, which is a massive
$3 trillion
basket of cash from their mineral.
And so they've avoided the resource curse, which is this thing where if countries like us, we have Dutch disease, where you have lots of resources, one, other countries come and take it, or you become overly reliant on that money from those resources. You just buy people's votes every election until you run out of that resource, Venezuela, and then the country kind of collapses because you haven't built a sustainable kind of funding model for your government, which Australia hasn't fully fallen into. Because we don't get any money for it. We decided to do our best to avoid Dutch disease by letting US-owned Exxon cartel come into our country, take our gas for free and pay nothing in income taxes and nothing for the gas. So we're not reliant on the revenue because we barely get any. So to Norway is like the gold standard, right?
Well, they must pay like a leasing fee or something, right?
Well,
what do they pay?
Well, you think about it, like a baker or a builder has to buy their resource. Baker has to buy flour. Builder has to buy bricks. For these people, it's like, I'm going to build a house. Well, you can have the bricks for free, mate. You just have them.
So
that's what we're doing for them.
Yeah, it's amazing.
And then,
then
it gets even worse, is because you heard of a gas shortage?
Apparently
we're running out of gas.
Yeah.
Because we gave it all away to another company and they sold it overseas for heaps of money. Like Japan is on selling our gas because they get it for so cheap. So they're making money out of our gas. We don't have enough for us driving up our energy costs because we have to buy it at the same rate that they would sell it at in Europe because of wars and stuff. So we're buying back our own gas that we probably gave people for free because we're running out of it. And then the solution from these gas cartels is to say, see, we got to drill for more gas. Like you look at the graph and it's like, we're giving away this much. We're burning this much here in Australia. They use like this much of it. I'm using like a third of it just to compress it into LNG to then ship it. So we use more of our gas.
You need the energy to compress the energy to put it on a boat to send it away so that you can buy it back.
Yes. Correct.
So, yeah, I mean, you're making me feel like we should just be communists, really. We should just nationalize
the energy
sector.
And Norway's doing it.
Keep our why are we paying for gas at all? We've got shit tons of it.
Literally.
Just give me.
Make
it rain gas, baby. Just a little bit.
Yeah.
By the standards of what Australia has, we have so much natural resources. We could give ourselves as much as we want to for free, and it would probably not even be 10% of the total output of our natural resources.
Yeah. But like you said, the gold standard is Norway. So gas cartels could buy us off for super cheap and be like, oh, okay, you're getting upset about this. All right, we'll give it to you for free. And we're like, yay, cheaper energy for us. Great. But then the gold standard is Norway.
Free energy for us. Free. I don't want cheap.
Don't want cheap, I want free. Right?
Come back to me when we're talking about free.
Free.
Gas.
especially for manufacturing sector. Like we could be a manufacturing powerhouse with all this stuff. But the ship's kind of sailed on that. The gold standard's Norway,
Right.
where they have the fund. They still have high taxes. They're still a high taxing nation. They're not reliant on the funds that they get from all of their oil because they put it in a sovereign wealth fund. That when oil runs out, the sovereign wealth fund's like $2 to $3 trillion. By the time their oil's run out, it's probably $5 or $6 trillion. They're just invested all over the world. They've now they turned their oil into a massive piggy bank that keeps printing money for them as a nation. We have pissed away decades of our remember the mining resources boom for the coal and like you said, we got bauxite, we got aluminium, we got everything. And our top royalty, I think Queensland just did up their coal royalty as to a progressive or whatever. That's between like 10 and 15%. They'd made it progressive, so when the price goes higher, it gets higher. So Queensland actually did a really good thing. Watch Queensland, they may get rid of it because the Liberal government, who knows? But the coal in New South Wales is like our royalty is like between 10 and 12% sort of thing. So that's kind of what we're talking about. And so I guess what I'm doing
And you're saying Norway is 70 to 80%.
Yeah.
By contrast.
Yeah, well, that's like taxes and all the things wrapped in together. But the flyover is we could also have a sovereign wealth fund that when our resources run out, which they will eventually, maybe not in our lifetime, we will be set for life. Or we could have resources run out and we have nothing.
Why are we doing it then?
And then we go back to short-term gains from politicians, media.
And like how scary it becomes. It's really hard because like the public needs to be literate enough about this stuff politically to understand that a scare campaign is just a bullshit scare campaign and they should ignore it.
Yes.
It's very hard to do that when the information that the public gets is filtered through the biases of corporations that
who are invested in this.
Yeah, so then, along comes social media and goes, well, all right, now we're going to unleash the power of the individual to sort of democratize information. But at the same time, as you get wise geniuses like you and me, you also get a lot of shit that further confuses and bamboozles people. Yeah. And all of a sudden, the next time there's a pandemic, you're going to have a lot more people thinking vaccines have got... A lot of
immunologists out there.
That's right. And epidemiologists about how your heart's going to explode in your chest if you take the 5G vaccine chip that Bill Gates made.
They read an abstract.
So what do you do with that then?
Good question.
You make more videos on you as a YouTube short.
I guess.
Honestly, get the clicks, baby.
Like, I don't know. I think everything you point out is exactly... The good news is that the power centers of information disbursement is being cracked open. Like, people are wising up to Murdoch's propaganda machine. Like, they're kind of like, okay, corporate media is a bit obviously leading us astray, covering this stuff up, not talking about it. But like you said, it's always in subtle ways. It's not that they're lying to us, especially corporate media. They're just not talking about it, right? Like, no corporate media has spoken to me yet. ABC's recently been, I did ABC radio this morning, going, oh, this is a bit interesting. This guy's got a big following. Turns out people do care about this issue. Corporate media haven't done it, and that's kind of what they do. They go, let's just ignore it and hope it goes away because we've done 20 years of propaganda against this sort of thing. Oh, communists, if you get your own resources for free. Whereas I'm like, no, like, mate, this is pure capitalism. That's my shit in the ground. That's mine. Yeah. Where the hell is my dividend? So that's actually, it's more capitalist to do it yourself as a government because we own it. But all that being said with the media sphere, so it's kind of splintering a little bit into different information sources. But I think we're entering a new age of illiteracy. We're literate enough to read. We're literate enough to fool ourselves with our own biases. We can read whatever we want. We can read abstracts, but we're too illiterate enough to know, like, let's take scientific papers. Like, I don't know what's a good sample size, what it should avoid, what epidemiological studies should be included, whether this paper's been discredited by this guy who's actually the gold standard. I don't know. So I can read something.
Maybe we have too much information. I had a segment on my ABC radio show called Do Your Own Research, which was basically a refutation of the idea that you should do your own research.
I'm with you. Bring that back.
It was like, no, I'm going to get an expert so that you don't have to do your own research, because how could you possibly do your own research as well as the expert has done their research, because they devote their entire life to it. And you know what? You have to make peanut butter sandwiches for your kids to take to school. Actually, not peanut butter, because that'll there
Kill
might be a
everyone.
nut allergy that everyone will die. But you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Unless you're a homicidal parent, you're going to make your Vegemite sandwiches. So the idea that you should do your own research and that the solution, I mean, I find this personally tricky because I'm something of a free speecher. So I do think that the best solution to a bad idea is more ideas and more argumentation and more speech. But at the same time, I also feel like if someone is misguided and reading a whole lot of nonsense, I'm not sure that the best thing to do is to go, here's 50 more randomly selected books that may or may not be, accurate.
And you can't tell if they are or not.
Yeah, here's another. Yeah, just keep reading more and do more research in this fire hose of information that we're throwing at you. Like maybe we need some... I guess what I'm actually asking for here, I'm just talking myself into a corner in which we need a good public broadcaster because the point of... And I'm not saying we don't have one, but we could use a more aggressive and courageous and less risk-averse public broadcaster who filters facts, just gives you the facts. People trust that it doesn't have a political slant and that it's not, taken over by factions ideologically. I think that is maybe the longer-term solution. And the fact that America doesn't have that is a problem.
Well, have you read Yuval Harari's Nexus?
No, I haven't read it yet, but I've read the other two, and it's on my bedside table.
So he gave me some interesting ideas around this, like free speech media and things like that. Because normally I'm in your corner. I'm like, you don't want to be censoring people. You don't want to be doing all that stuff. But I think the free speech conversation, is a deliberate misrepresentation of what's actually going on, because it's not like anyone's ever been at threat to going to jail for saying something, which is like you're very rigid, like free speech. I can say what I want. Albo's not going to lock me up.
Well, that's not entirely true outside of the States. There are
yes, I'm talking Australia.
No, even in Australia, like there are instances in which like free speech, in which you say something and you can get locked up for it. There were people arrested during COVID for,
that was
posting
crazy,
on
actually.
Facebook about how they wanted to,
and they went to that woman's house.
Yeah,
that was
a plan.
Okay, I take that back. So stand corrected.
So there are certain things.
Okay, excellent point. But when it comes to how Musk is talking about free speech on his platform and all of these sorts of things, it's like all of a sudden we all want to talk about free speech, which we can all get on board with. We shouldn't be like censoring people. But Yuval Harari brings in the other element that kind of counters what you were saying, where you're like, more speech better. He's kind of points to history and goes, truth doesn't always sift to the top. In fact, most of the time it doesn't. And he brings up like the Salem witch trials and all these things where like this pandemic of misinformation just kind of runs rampant because it's more potent than the truth. Like with your saying, when you're like, well, technically, like in this scenario, it might not have been explicit. Like that doesn't travel
it's
as
boring.
well as me saying, God, politicians are corrupt.
Yes.
So truth.
This is my problem. I need more clickbait.
Yeah,
help me out here.
Yeah.
Help a brother out.
Yeah.
They love me on Substack where they can listen to me
like,
for hours.
tell me the nuance of your article.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But not on I can't do a YouTube short to save my life.
I know. It's tough because you have to, and this is what
you got to be so self-certain.
This is my personal problem, which is why I never wanted to get into this,
right?
Because I don't know anything. And
but you have a good air of knowledge.
But it's
I'm
vague.
always like this, and what about that?
You can drop way more stats on stuff.
Yeah, but I'm always equivocating about like I know.
But that's good. That's what you want,
right? Maybe.
You don't want to listen to me. I'm only here because
I do want to listen to you. That's why you're in this room.
I know, but you shouldn't because I don't know what I'm talking about.
Everybody, don't listen to him. Unsubscribe.
You got this far in, we got there.
Right.
And this is just my premise for how I approach it.
Yes.
He's going, I'm an idiot. I can be fooled on anything that I don't know anything about.
Right.
So this whole Doge stuff coming out, everyone's like, oh, it's outrageous to spend money on that. I'm like, whoa, you didn't even know that USAID was a department before now. And now you've been given a stat out of context without anything around it. Of course it sounds like a scam.
Yeah.
But are you in your couch the best person with one tweet from one billionaire guy saying that is that the best way to determine whether it's government waste or not? I'm not saying it. Hey, hit government waste. I hate government waste for sure. But I can be fooled. And that's kind of what I'm trying to enter the conversation to kind of go, okay, here are some broad strokes. Here's how we can get more degrees of certainty around certain things. And here's how you collect a bunch of people smarter than you to help you sift the world. Because like you said, there's too much information. We are community creatures. We need almost a centralized place where we pay people to sift through all the bullshit and then give me a 1-hour podcast about why it's misinformation, why it's not. And then
those people are called journalists and they have jobs.
Really? So that's a crazy idea, right? But then corporations bought all the journalistic outlets and then they lent on what they should cover.
Not all of them. They're still public broadcasting, public news.
But there's still a leaning happening onto these. So it starts with the corporate. They kind of lean on, hey, we're invested in that. Don't talk about that story. They're not lying to you. They just don't mention it. People aren't interested in that. So they feed you the junk food. And then that's what's happened with social media. We think, it's all free speech now because of social media. You got a billionaire that owns every single one. And the algorithm, and this is where Yuval Harari, at least I think, lands the plane on don't attack free speech. Don't attack individuals. This is where I think the left is going off, kind of losing its own fight. Don't attack people for what they say. People are idiots. They're going to say dumb shit. That's what we do. I don't know any. I've probably said a few wrong things now. I'd say that I'm just trying to grasp everything I can. People can say what they want, but bots cannot. And algorithms should be transparent. And so I just kind of go up the tree and go, corporate influence on media organizations is a big problem. Now we've got corporate influence on algorithms. All an algorithm is an automated editor. So you were a journalist, you worked there, you had an editor being like, hey, cover that, don't cover that, producers saying, working with you to say what you should do. Now we've just outsourced it to an algorithm. And Facebook and X and all these people just go, oh, yeah, it's just the algorithm. But no, they're making editorial decisions every single minute of every single day. But for some reason, AI gets a free pass. Because if the ABC published something that was factually very incorrect and ruined someone's reputation, they'd be in trouble. Same with any other legacy media organization. But if Facebook boosts a post, makes an editorial decision that they outsource to an AI to get clicks, they have no accountability.
Yeah.
And so I think...
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Once the algorithm is in the room, then you have to be held accountable for the stuff that you're publishing because you can't hide behind this is just other people talking to each other in a free, open town square. It's not a town square because you're the one who's elevating, who's allowing people to stand up or hiding them behind a partition. You're the one who's giving them a loudhailer or a bullhorn or not. Social media regulation is like a whole other thing. I would hope, part of what has to happen, and here I am to nuance bro you again.
I love it. I like this.
About the corporate. I think you're too focused on the role that Rupert Murdoch plays in the sense that all of us have blind spots and all of us have echo chambers and we're all inside bubbles to one degree or another.
Can't escape it.
Yeah, and there can be echo chambers and bubbles that are completely free from corporate influence that are just part of a mob mentality. Look at the way that the public broadcaster has covered the controversy amongst health professionals about what to do about young people who show up with gender dysphoria who are, 12 years old or something. There's been a real live debate in the medical professions about how to treat that. There's been a real live debate in athletics and stuff about what to do about trans kids. This has become such a boring, hoary, old, bitter, disgusting kind of debate on both sides now. But one couldn't deny that there's been, and you could extend this to Gaza or Palestine or whatever, that there's been an intersecting set of kind of thought bubbles where there are penalties for speaking bluntly in a bullshit-free way about something, and everybody is kind of certain that they're on the right side of history. And that can happen... That can happen without any corporate influence whatsoever. That just happens as an organic outcropping of the fact that we're tribal mammals who, are primates who kind of live in the soup that we live in.
Well, here's my theory then. Can you tell me if it's worthwhile as an approach to this? Because when you approach politics, there's a million different things. True, not true, whatever it is. So what do you focus on? And that's what I have to do now. I'm like, okay, people are looking at my stuff. What do I focus on? I have to make an editorial decision, go, what do I think is most important? Here's my theory. And then you can debunk it as it goes.
I'm sharpening my sword.
Yes. This is what I came here for. Just get dismantled by nuance. Okay, so I talk about corporations because there's no data on it. I don't know how you would even measure such a thing. But in my theory, I'd go, well, corporate influence has its fingers Let's go. Let's start at cost of living with your everyday punter. Energy's expensive. Banks are expensive. Food's getting expensive. All those things. What are they? They're all corporate monopolies.
Eggs. Can we talk about the price of eggs?
I don't buy eggs. So
Crying out loud.
Couldn't tell you.
What are you, a vegan or something?
Like a lazy vegetarian.
But eggs are vegetarian.
So I just don't like eggs. They're just prejudiced against them.
Okay, all right.
But anyway, so they got all these things. Okay, what's the common denominator with every issue in our economy? Our economy is actually...
Eggs is the common denominator. Eggs.
You've got monopolies. And so monopolies, like corporations have worked out how to make more profit than anyone else. You could innovate, sure. Employ more people. Pay someone more. Yeah, it's tricky. Or just buy the government. Right? Make them turn a blind eye to regulatory things so that you can keep price gouging up in prices, all those sorts of things. How do you get the consent of everybody else? Well, you buy media organizations, you distract them with culture wars, you do all that stuff. It's all part of the ecosystem. So if I would argue, and happy to be correct, I would argue that is a bigger problem for our big picture economy and the things that everyday Aussies are struggling with than the one you describe with, the ABC's probably got a bit of a university educated little circle echo chamber going on with people that know each other, blah, 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 and they can get a blind spot too. So my theory would be, because I think that this issue is far bigger and far further reaching, and if we solved it, that would improve a lot of different outcomes, then hopefully what we came up with for that solution would trickle down to if we built a system that could defend against corporate interest and verification on, information, and making sure that we have, different, like science, different inputs to everything to make sure your accuracy is higher in percentage.
Yeah.
It can never be 100%.
No, absolutely.
Then I would hope
yes,
that in your scenario, it also deals with that, because that's also a problem. I just choose to go, I think that one's bigger and that one's more pressing and that one touches more thing.
Yes. But
that's why I reduce everything to that.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I should just be clear. I mean, sometimes when I'm critical of thought bubbles on the social justice left, people will say, well, why do you expend any time complaining about something that is less important than the fact that fascists are taking over the right and there's a rise in right-wing populism? To which my answer is, because I think that the right-wing populism and the right-wing takeover is only possible when the left loses sight of its economic bread and butter issues, right? So, I'm not concerned about the conversation about transgender girls in sport in and of itself. I'm concerned about the fact that the less reasonable you sound on common sense issues, the more vulnerable you are to culture warriors to denigrate you and try to win people over to, their bullshit positions, which then allow them to impose their corrupt right-wing view of the world.
And that's why I listen to you, because I agree.
There you go.
I'm like, that's...
We've got to fight against big tobacco. We've got to fight against big chicken with the egg prices. Mm-hmm. Talk to me before we go about mullets. Very important issue.
You should have one.
So would you say that you've got a mullet exactly?
I trimmed it into one, but then it's kind of like grown out a little bit.
It's a very stylish. It's a great haircut.
I'm going for subtle.
Yeah.
So this is a barley haircut. It was
it
$4. Yeah. Wow. Yeah.
$4 is expensive for a barley haircut.
Oh, that's pretty good.
It's fancy.
You haven't been to Bali in a while.
No, I haven't been to Bali in a while. I haven't been to Bali since I was a teenager. Mate, it cost 40 cents when I was last in Bali.
Mate, heck, you can pay $15 in Bali if you're not careful.
Out of town.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
Tell you what, I was just booking a trip to Japan because that's what rich, fancy people like me do.
Yeah.
Everyone's always banging on about how cheap Japan is.
It is cheap. I was just there.
It's not cheap.
Oh, it was when I was just there.
Was it? How long ago were you there?
4 days.
Really?
Yeah.
And what would like a 3-star normal hotel set you back?
Well, I can just tell you what I did. I stayed in a little old capsule hotel.
Yeah, they're great.
Yeah. It was about
I bet that was like
$50 a night.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. I had the onsen, so I'm on board with this onsen thing.
I'm
just sitting nude with a bunch of other dudes in a tub.
It's the nude thing for me. I'm not all body shamed, but I found it a bit unexpected because I booked a capsule hotel in Tokyo on a stopover from New York to Sydney, and I get there, I thought, this will be fun, the whole capsule hotel thing. And I'm checking in, and a couple of old Japanese guys just walk past me.
Oh, while you're checking in?
Yeah, completely just little Asian dicks flopping out right in my face.
Nothing to hide.
It's a lobby. It's a lobby. And they're just going from one sauna to the other.
Ours had a sign that said, closed beyond this point. So
Oh, okay. There may have been one of those.
Might have changed,
no
yeah.
one was mindful of that.
Yeah.
So I just found that a little bit odd. Like there's a time and a place for testicles. Hotel lobby, in my opinion.
onsen, testicles
Anyway,
everywhere.
this is just me complaining about how expensive travel has become. A lot of the, you look for a 3-star hotel in Tokyo, you're talking about $300, $400, $450 a night.
Didn't look. I've 3-star. Must be nice.
3 is not very nice.
Must be. I one day, Josh, I'll let you know how
One
it goes.
day, you two will get to stay in an extended stay
Without
motel.
some bloke snoring through 2 layers of perspex next to me.
So is that all you had to say about mullets? I thought you were going to put out a real call in defense of the mullet.
Well,
or
I think
something.
I think the mullet is a good haircut. I think you should have one. I think it's a haircut of the people,
Right.
haircut of the punters, and I think like I was saying before, I think it leans into the Aussie trend
Yeah.
of showing your confidence
Yeah.
whilst knowing you look silly, but because you know you look silly and everyone else knows that you look silly, confidence looks cool.
Right, I see. So what you're calling for is less the mullet per se and more the ironic, the knowing mullet.
I would argue every Aussie with a mullet is doing it ironically.
That's not true.
Happy to be proven wrong.
That's not
Give me
true.
citations.
That is, I mean, it depends where you are
In Australia.
right? No, it depends where in Australia you are.
I don't
Depends
know.
on. I mean, I don't want to be too offensive about your socio-cultural,
Yeah.
nuances.
Yeah.
But I think if you're in a
Do you reckon any Aussies anywhere in this country is like, yeah, bro.
yeah, absolutely.
I'll believe when I see it.
I reckon I reckon if you're in hipster town, right?
Yeah.
If you're in the kind of place where baristas charge $6.50 for a coffee and they have a twirly moustache,
Yeah.
then nobody is doing a mullet non-ironically. Everyone's doing it ironically there, right? They know what they're doing. But you drive 50 minutes away from the coast, you get into the heartland, you get into the suburbs.
Would you say Newcastle's the
Gulf.
heartland?
Newcastle? I don't understand the culture of Newcastle well enough.
Mining
I mean,
town,
you're not
footy
better than I do.
town,
Yeah.
tradies.
But it's also hip now,
yeah, some sections.
It's like,
But it's still also not. There's like one strip of Newcastle where it's,
Yeah.
you're like, that's nice.
it's the only
you go-
strip I've ever been to, a man of my caliber.
Yeah, 3-star
never
hotels
exit.
are only there.
I always stayed at a 4-star hotel because it wasn't Japanese, man. I wasn't paying in yen. I was paying in cheap Newcastle dollars.
You go one street over, mate.
Right.
Back to Hart Newcastle. Back to
Right.
like
And are you-
Bogan,
is it
footy,
your-
Commodore driving.
And is it your assertion that every mullet in Newcastle is an ironic one?
I reckon you can tell when you walk past, like, because a lot of the punters out there listen to the podcast and watch my stuff. They're like tradies, Newcastle blokes, like kind of my crowd. And you walk past, they have a mullet, and you just give them that look. You're like,
Yeah.
nice haircut, mate.
Yeah.
And, they're like, yeah, cheers, mate.
Mm.
And I feel like even in, on the job sites, if you were to ask someone on a job site, if they kind of know what they're doing, they'd be like,
Like
yeah,
a construction
mate,
site.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't know. That's my theory.
Okay.
Happy to be proven wrong. Give me the data, your citations.
I
and-
will definitely I'll find a peer-reviewed, in Mullet Monthly.
Yeah,
something about.
Do you have a mullet?
survey.
Yes. How highly do you rate your mullet? 10. How highly do you think other people rate your mullet? Ooh, 1.
Mm.
And then we'll see what happens.
That's right. Or just like, are you doing it for shits and giggles? Like, are you having a laugh?
Yeah. I haven't.
Are you having a laugh?
How much fun are you having with your mullet?
Yeah, exactly.
I reckon it's so high.
Yeah.
I'm telling you,
Yeah.
Josh, you should give it a crack.
I'm gonna give it a shot.
classy 80s for you.
For me.
Yeah, just like a little blend to
So
the band.
classy mullet is one that is not too short on top. Is it
Yeah,
what you
not
are?
too aggressive.
long. Yeah.
Just blend it. Whatever you do, you just end up blending it.
But it's so good, isn't it, to have like a basically fully shaven head that just all of a sudden turns into a massive long rat's tail.
That's aggressive.
That's
Yeah, I'm not here to tell you how to mullet. You
Okay.
do whatever works for
Here to
you.
tell me how Australian politics works, should work.
Don't listen to me. I listen to you.
All right. Any prognostications about the election, about the upcoming Australian election?
Only hope. I only have hope that politicians, that punters are working out, that politicians, we all know politicians lie to us. I'm pushing people just like pick an issue you care about.
Yeah.
Look at their voting record. Right? Peter Dutton's all, cost of living, blah, blah, blah. Bro, he votes against all the solutions to it. Just have a look at his voting
Like
record.
what?
Like, yeah, you can go to They Vote For You and it'll be like on the housing stuff. What's he done to alleviate housing crisis? What's he done to I don't know. I don't want to get into like different news headline clickbait.
I mean, the guilty secret about the housing crisis is that everyone says that they want housing to be more affordable.
Still too many people own homes.
Well, I mean, everyone who owns a home doesn't want it.
They want their mythical wealth to continue.
Exactly.
They want to keep feeling rich with no income.
Yes. But it's not totally imaginary because they could sell their house and move to Venezuela and have a lot of cash.
A lot of cash.
Yeah.
I mean, you could do that, but it
is complicated, the housing thing, in the sense that, like, I bought within the past 5 years, right? And so
good for you.
I paid, $70 million for a small shack. And although I wouldn't shed any tears if people who bought in the 1970s had to see the price of their house just go back to what it was in, say, 2015, and they can bank decades and decades of massive capital growth.
Yeah.
I do think it would be unfair for people like me who spent $70 million on a shack to lose 20 million of that in order to reduce you'd need to somehow compensate people who have only gotten into the market recently who are going to lower the overall cost of...
That just depends on the solutions that are on the table. Like Alan Kohler is the bloke that I don't know, I just listen to smarter people than me, and Alan Kohler seems to think that...
He's an economist.
Is he? He's the bloke, he's the ABC bloke, who's the old dude who... Is he economist?
Yeah, he's an economics journalist,
Yeah. So I assume he'd have a piece of paper behind him. Probably should have checked that before I believe what he said. Bloody got me. And he seems to think that like there are solutions that can just level off the housing increase in prices. Like, we've just come to expect that housing should go up in value all the time. Well, should it?
And to non-Australians... Australia's property market has doubled every decade for at least a half century. So it just, and every decade, everyone's like, well, surely this is going to end. It can't keep going up.
And we're the generation, I'm the generation that's looking at these prices going, no, there's nothing I can do to afford.
Absolutely nothing.
Like a house now.
So what does Kohler say? He says,
so he has a few different solutions. Like he kind of points it, because it's a multi-pronged approach. Like, people just want to blame immigrants. A lot of punters in my comments like, it's bloody immigrants. Like, they're a factor, yes. Like, what are we doing with immigration? Are we going forever? Well, what's the go? We should have a conversation about that. The left runs from it. Have that conversation, and then...
Also, should anyone anywhere in the world be able to buy a house in Australia with no intention of living in it ever?
Another great question.
Citizen?
But how often does that happen as well? So according to Alan Kohler, he pins it on John Howard's halving of the capital gains tax in conjunction with negative gearing that turns a housing market into a speculative asset where people take tax breaks to get gains later, causing people and you can look at the stats, the people that own the biggest investors in properties are the people with the highest on-paper salaries in Australia. You got anaesthetists, surgeons, principals, all the people with $200,000-$300,000 salaries. It must be nice. Oh, I can't wait. I hope so. And so they're the people that go, okay, we want to reduce our tax because we get a halving of the capital gains tax and we can negatively gear. We'll just take our money and put it into a house. So we're just buying lots of houses. So the as far as I understand it, the financialization of the housing sector is one of the biggest problems.
I mean, it is totally bonkers that you can deduct the interest on a property that you don't live in, but not on a property that you do live in. You know, it's the opposite in America.
Oh, really?
In America, you deduct the interest on your own home to encourage home ownership.
Sounds like a good idea.
Yeah, which if you would... I mean, I think it's all stupid. There shouldn't be any tax deduction at all on property. But it is... Or like another solution I've heard people talk about is for every tax file number, which is like a social security number in Australia, you can own 3 properties, for example.
Yeah.
But you can't buy more than... You can't have more than 3 properties.
But then in America, you go to these financial investment firms like BlackRock and stuff, just building portfolios of houses. And buying. And I had rumors, so definitely fact checks on this, but Albo was wanting to, in one of his housing bills, open up investment from these financial firms to then build affordable housing.
Oh, really?
So that's the other thing Alan Kohler's talking about, which is build public housing.
Yes.
Build it directly.
I see.
Because I
but
think,
also just build a shit ton of stuff. Because, I mean, you sort of poo-pooed the immigration thing, but it is true that if you import...
Did I poo-poo? I thought I gave it credence.
You said it was true, but yeah, no, you poo-pooed, I guess, people's fixation on it.
Yeah,
maybe there's a certain
lots of poo-pooing on that one.
Who do fixate on it too much.
Yeah.
But, you know, any economist will tell you, if you keep adding demand and you don't increase supply at the pace that the demand is increasing, and we do have a very high immigration rate, which I support, and at the same time, build enough fucking hospitals, schools, and apartments for those people to live in. Don't just pour them into the country and not expect things to get more expensive and scarce.
So then the question becomes, why aren't we building enough? And as far as I understand it, smarter people correct me, but what we've done with government housing is we've just outsourced it. We're building less government direct housing, which is the government just going, we will build houses. Because apparently if the government builds a house, it's not an asset. But if a private sector builds a house, then it's an asset. So make up your mind. Do we want the government to invest in assets? Build houses. It's still a great investment given the returns that our market's just seen. So build the damn houses. But then they're also like playing little tricky bugger word games that I'm trying to get my head around. That is, affordable housing, affordable. No, hang on. I'm thinking public housing. No, affordable, where they give tax breaks, incentives to all these private property developers to build a certain amount of units, and then they'll do X percentage of those units that they build at X percent below market rent. Whereas if you really want to put pressure and competition into this sector, you build houses cheaply, rent it out at cost of production. The government can just go, we're just going to break even on this. All of a sudden, you've got competition to those expensive property developers, because property developers, a lot of them aren't building in cheap areas where we need the housing, because guess what? The returns aren't as good there because poor people don't have lots of money. So they build here. So there's lots of I think that from what I've seen in my whole lifetime, private sector seems to have failed it to build enough houses. No one blames. We've been letting the private sector build them exclusively, or as close to as possible, for so long.
Well, we also don't let the private sector build as much as it would like. I mean, you would need a double-pronged approach, which is lots more public housing built by the government and allow private... there are incredible restrictions on what can be built where in Australia.
Yeah, like high-rise and...
I mean, the only option that we give is essentially to just keep adding to urban sprawl by building more and more suburbs on the outskirts.
Not good.
There is look at a city like Paris, where the entire thing is medium density. Basically, it's all, if you think of like the inner west of a city like Sydney, where people like living in that kind of environment. You know, it's a little bit tight. It's like terraces and things. You think about, I don't know, suburbs like Marrickville or Balmain. But it's a good standard of living, and it's a lot more dense than suburbs are, and you don't have to have soulless skyscrapers in order to achieve it. But you could, there are tax incentives and development incentives you could create to try to pack more people onto every hectare of land.
Because I feel like, and this is just my punter feelings on this, I feel like we've been doing that for a long bloody time. And yes, there are still restrictions, and yes, we can tighten up those things. But I came across some other economist, Cam Murray, he was pointing out that developer Jennings, he was looking at like the release of land, the land that government's approved. So property developers seem to be saying, it's bloody government red tape, we're not building enough houses. And then it comes out that AV Jennings has been sitting on land and sitting on stuff that's been government approved, is ready to go. And then the speculation from economists is like, well, the less houses they are, the more premium they get for what they're building. Right. So they're going to kind of constrain their own supply, because if they flood the market like we need, they get less money for it.
That makes sense.
So once again, my bias is to look at these bludgers and solutions in all angles, like get government efficiency and get like some density
and also
rules.
like tax incentives for people. Like, why is it that our parents, for example, will be, or our friends' parents, might be sitting on houses that they bought in the 70s or 80s that were big enough to raise a family and kids in, and then when the kids move out, they just stay in that house. Like, it should become. I'm sorry, old people, but we should start taxing the value of the property or something in some way to make it financially untenable, really, for people to just exist in huge houses. And we should encourage them to subdivide it or to, renovate it in such a way that 14 Vietnamese families can live in it instead.
Yeah.
They don't even have to be Vietnamese.
Yeah.
All right, final question. What do you reckon the odds are that when we're old, the things that you're focusing on now have gotten addressed.
This next election maybe determine my answer, because the trends look good. The trend away from the major parties who are stiffing us in the pockets of the corporates, whether it's, light slap on the wrists or just opening the doors, we're getting sick of it. And our political system allows us to do that. The US you don't have the beauty of our electoral system. I get to vote for who I want and then who I would rather. Do I want a punch in the face or a kick in the nuts? I get to choose, but I also get to say...
Wait, are you talking about preferential voting or the fact that we have independents who can actually get in?
Both,
yeah.
Because then I can vote
we're what Americans call... What do they call preferential
ranked choice voting?
Ranked choice voting, yes, exactly. So
the greatest system that could save your democracy.
Yeah, it's fabulous.
It's the best.
Yeah.
I can walk in and go, I'm going to give funding to my number one, so the government's going to give them money to try again next time. And then I can rank them. And then when they're like, listen, we only got the 2 jerks in your electorate that your vote's going to go to. Who do you want? I'm like, well, that guy. We can do that.
Yeah.
And if Aussies understand that, because major political parties don't want you to understand that. They talk about, but the Greens just do preference deals, blah, blah. Nah, you decide your preferences. You do. The Greens don't take my vote. If I put Greens 1, they don't go, we'll give it to someone else now. No, I decide that.
Well, if you have the option of only filling in 1, in which case they will allocate their preferences. Yeah, that's right.
See, I'm getting educated now too.
So
I thought you had to fill in every box.
No, either fill in every box or only fill in 1 box. And if you only fill in 1 box, then the one that you vote for, they will determine you.
At different states, different.
Entirely possible.
Because I heard Queensland wanted to go back to that system, but they had changed from that system where you had to number every box.
I also may be wrong in that I might be talking about only the way it works in only one house. It's possible that that's true, like for the upper house, but not the lower house.
From memory, all I remember is like with the Senate and stuff, it's like number at least this many. That's what I remember reading.
Right.
And with the other one, I just thought you always had to, but...
Welcome back to two guys who don't know anything about electoral politics talking about the electoral system.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much for being here. Good luck. I hope everything goes okay for humanity. And I hope Yuval Noah Harari is proven wrong and we're all fine.
And the good stuff floats to the top.
Exactly.
And keep an eye out for some billboards this month too.
Oh, yeah, that was the other thing I wanted to ask you about. You got billboards going up.
Billboards going up.
Your mug on them?
My mug on them.
Your big fat face on a billboard.
I put it out to like the Patreon guys. I was like, guys, do I have to like have my face on it? And they're like, yeah.
How do you get... Isn't a billboard expensive?
Yes, very expensive.
How do you pay for a billboard?
With 2,000 punters donating $5, $10, $100.
Amazing.
We raised... I was like, we'll just get 1 billboard. It's a bit of a gimmick. Like, we're onto you, gas cartels. Like, we're coming for you. And then it raised up to 30 grand. And then I was like, hey, guys, this is amazing. We raised 30 grand. $85,000 as it stands right now. So we'll have like 15 billboards across the country.
Amazing. What are they going to say?
It'll have a graph on it showing...
Can one of them just be your asshole? Just a big asshole?
Mine?
Yeah.
Don't know what that looks like. We'll put it in there. I think the designs are set.
Submit it to the board. Just have a conversation about it. I'm just spitballing.
I'll ask the punters, but the main one's me like doing this, and it says "Why so small?" And then
you're putting your hand up with a little,
and it's got a graph that's like Norway's
okay.
resource take, Australia's resource take, and I'm like, whoa, so small.
Right.
Yeah, I feel like Aussies might like the little dick joke in there.
Yeah, that's good.
So I'm just trying to appeal to the Aussies.
That's about the gas tax.
Yeah.
Any other ideas?
Other ones, I've heard you can call out companies directly. Just don't use their logo.
You can't defame a company.
Yeah.
If it has more than 10 employees. Or
10 employees.
Like
So we might be trading a line somewhere.
Why? You're going to go after some tiny...
Oh, not tiny.
Mum and pop. No, if it's a big company, you can't defame it. Yeah.
Well, great. Well, it's like Exxon, Santos, Impex.
That's right. Yeah, you can
these guys, I may or may not, depending on billboard companies, if they allow it or not. But essentially, just show the tax rates of some of these gas companies.
Right.
That's all. I'm just showing you what I
it.
Looked at the ATO data. The number said 0. Yeah. I'm just putting it up there.
And is the goal here, in addition to your own personal self-aggrandizement and self-promotion using other people's money, to pressure both parties into taking those issues seriously?
Yeah. And here's my pitch to Albo.
Okay.
You know what it was like to be in a party. Albo, I know you're watching. You know what it's like to be in a party that took something bold to the election, both in 2013 with the mining tax and then in 2000 with Bill Shorten, where he said, we're going to attack negative gearing and some of this stuff we were talking about. You know what it's like for the public to not understand and for fear campaigns to take root. I am Albo's best friend because what I'm trying to do is make the everyday punter aware of the difference between a royalty and a tax. Because what the cartels do is they go, royalty, resource tax, tax. Oh, they're taxing you. And punters go, oh, bloody taxes? No. And then the fear campaign wins. But over the last year, I've shown that when people understand this difference and really are coming to understand it, they really want to charge money for our own resources. So if anything, Albo, I'm doing your bloody work that you should be doing for you. You should be standing up and saying, no, I'm going to take on the mining industry because this is a joke. You've been too afraid to do that. So with 2,000 punters and more behind me on this issue, we've got billboards explaining to the everyday punter that we want this. Everyone wants this to happen. Now you can just put the policy there. And when the mining cartels run their fear campaign, I've hopefully done a lot of the work for you. That's the hope.
There you go.
So come on the podcast.
Signed, sealed, delivered. He's going to be on the next podcast.
Yeah,
Next
we'll
podcast
see.
episode.
You probably know some people that
I'll pull some
hook
strings.
me up.
Yeah, I'll pull some strings, sure.
Maybe we do a duo.
Not
You
gonna
and me?
happen. Never. Not
okay.
gonna happen.
All right. Let's try to Wesley. They need a co-host.
Thanks for stopping by. Lovely to talk to you.
Excellent. Thanks for having me.